Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Oceanographer. If you're settling in for the night or simply looking for something calm and fascinating to drift away with, you've come to exactly the right place. Before we begin our gentle descent into the deep, if you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. We'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what draws you to the ocean. Tonight, we are going to travel somewhere very few human beings have ever gone. We are going to explore the deep ocean. Not just the surface, not just the coral reefs you might have seen in photographs, but the true depths. The vast, cold, pressurized darkness that covers more of our planet than all of the land combined. The ocean is not simply a large body of water. It is a world. It has its own mountains, its own plains, its own weather systems, its own seasons, and its own forms of life so alien and so extraordinary that encountering them feels almost like discovering another planet. And yet, the deep ocean remains the least explored environment on Earth. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own seas. So tonight we will change that just a little. We will start at the surface, where sunlight still reaches and familiar life thrives, and we will descend slowly and quietly through layer after layer until we reach the very bottom. Along the way, we will learn how pressure builds, how temperature drops, how light disappears, and how life finds extraordinary ways to persist even when nothing should be able to survive. There is no need to rush. The ocean has been here for over 4 billion years. It is in no hurry, and neither are we. So breathe slowly, let your body relax, and let the deep pull you gently downward. To understand the deep ocean, it helps to first understand the ocean in its entirety. The ocean is not one thing. It is a system of interconnected basins, currents, gradients, and ecosystems that together regulate the temperature of our planet, produce more than half of the oxygen we breathe, and absorb enormous quantities of the carbon dioxide that living things exhale. 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by ocean water. If you were to stand on the moon and look back at our planet from the correct angle, you would see something that looked far more like a water world than a land world. The ancient Greeks were not wrong when they imagined the Earth surrounded by a great primordial sea. In many respects, that is precisely what it is. The total volume of ocean water on Earth is approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers. That number is almost impossible to hold in the mind, but consider this. If you were to take all the water in all the rivers and lakes and ice caps on land, it would amount to less than 3% of what the ocean holds. The ocean is, by a vast margin, the dominant feature of our world. And yet, for most of human history, we only truly knew the surface. Sailors crossed it, fishermen drew from its upper layers, and poets wrote about its moods. But the depths were unknown. They were imagined, feared, mythologized. Sailors told stories of creatures that could drag ships beneath the waves. Cartographers wrote on the edges of their maps, "Here be dragons." In some ways, the real ocean is stranger than any dragon. It is a place where fish produce their own light, where pressure would crush an unprotected human body in seconds, where temperatures hover just above freezing for kilometers at a stretch, where creatures have evolved in such complete isolation from sunlight that they have developed entirely novel ways of sustaining life, feeding not on the energy of the sun, but on the chemical energy of the Earth itself. The ocean can be divided in several useful ways. Horizontally, we speak of coastal zones where the sea meets the land, and the open ocean, sometimes called the pelagic zone, which stretches across the vast centers of the ocean basins. But for our journey tonight, the most important division is vertical. The ocean is not the same from top to bottom. It is a series of distinct layers, each with its own character, its own inhabitants, and its own rules. These layers are defined primarily by how much sunlight reaches them, by temperature, and by pressure. As we descend, each of these factors changes in profound ways. The transition from one layer to the next is not always sharp. Sometimes it is gradual, a slow fading rather than a sudden shift. But the differences between the topmost layer and the deepest are so extreme that they might as well be different planets. We will visit each of these layers in turn. But first, let us pause at the surface and understand what it is that sustains the ocean's first and most familiar world. The topmost layer of the ocean is called the epipelagic zone, though it is more commonly known by a simpler and more evocative name, the sunlit zone. It extends from the surface down to a depth of approximately 200 meters, though this boundary shifts depending on the clarity of the water and the angle of the sun. Within these uppermost 200 meters, sunlight penetrates with enough intensity to drive photosynthesis. This single fact is enormously important. Photosynthesis is the process by which tiny microscopic organisms called phytoplankton use the energy of sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into organic matter and oxygen. Phytoplankton are, in terms of sheer ecological impact, among the most significant organisms on the planet. They are invisible to the naked eye. A single drop of surface seawater might contain hundreds of thousands of them. They drift on currents and respond to shifts in temperature and nutrient availability. In places where cold, nutrient-rich water wells up from below, phytoplankton blooms can be so dense that they discolor the sea, turning it green or even red. From a satellite in orbit, these blooms are visible as great swirling patterns across the ocean surface. Phytoplankton form the base of almost every marine food chain. They are eaten by tiny animals called zooplankton, which are in turn eaten by small fish, which are eaten by larger fish, which may eventually be eaten by whales, sharks, dolphins, or seabirds. Everything above the sunlit zone ultimately depends on what happens within it. The sunlit zone is also where the ocean communicates most directly with the atmosphere. Here, gases are exchanged. Carbon dioxide is absorbed from the air and incorporated into organic matter. Oxygen is released back into the atmosphere. The ocean plays a vital role in the global carbon cycle, and most of that role is played out in these uppermost 200 meters. Temperature in the sunlit zone varies considerably, both by location and by season. Near the equator, surface waters may be as warm as 30 degrees Celsius, a temperature comfortable enough for swimming. Near the poles, surface waters approach freezing even in summer. These temperature differences drive enormous horizontal currents as warmer water expands and colder water contracts and sinks. The sunlit zone is also where you find the ocean's most famous inhabitants. Coral reefs, the great tropical ecosystems often called the rainforests of the sea, exist in this upper layer. So do sea turtles, schools of tuna, pods of dolphins, humpback whales on their migrations, and the vast shoals of sardines that move through the upper ocean like silver clouds. But as familiar and vivid as the sunlit zone feels, it represents only a small fraction of the ocean's total volume. Below 200 meters, the light begins to fail, and with the failing of the light, the world changes entirely. Below the sunlit zone, between approximately 200 and 1,000 meters, lies a realm that oceanographers call the mesopelagic zone. Those with a taste for atmosphere prefer its other name, the twilight zone. It is not entirely dark here, not yet, but the light that reaches this depth is dim, diffuse, filtered, and almost entirely blue. Blue light penetrates water more efficiently than any other wavelength. Red light is absorbed within the first few meters. Orange and yellow follow quickly. Green fades out within the first 100 meters or so, but blue, with its shorter wavelength, can travel deeper before it too is finally extinguished. In the twilight zone, the world is permanently blue-gray, as though perpetually suspended in a moment just before dawn. This dim blue world is one of the most biologically productive regions in the ocean, though you might not guess it from its appearance. The twilight zone contains an enormous quantity of biomass: fish, crustaceans, gelatinous creatures, and an array of organisms that spend their entire lives migrating between the depths and the surface. This migration is one of the great daily spectacles of the ocean, largely invisible to us because it happens in the dark, far from shore, at depths humans rarely visit. Every evening, as the sun sets, billions of individual organisms begin to rise from the twilight zone toward the surface. They come to feed on the phytoplankton and zooplankton that thrive in the sunlit zone under the cover of darkness, relatively safe from the visual predators that dominate the daylit surface. Then, as dawn approaches, they descend again, carrying with them the carbon they have ingested. This daily vertical migration is the largest migration on Earth, measured by sheer biomass. It dwarfs the great wildebeest migrations of the Serengeti, the salmon runs of the Pacific Northwest, and the monarch butterfly flights of North America. And it happens every single day, silently in the blue-gray depths, unseen by almost everyone. The organisms of the twilight zone have evolved remarkable adaptations to their environment. Many are transparent, making them nearly invisible in the dim light. Others are dark red or black, colors that absorb the remaining blue light rather than reflecting it, rendering them effectively invisible from below. Many have developed large, upward-facing eyes, capable of detecting the faintest silhouettes of prey against the dim glow from above. Bioluminescence, the biological production of light, becomes common in the twilight zone and below. Estimates suggest that more than 75% of all deep-sea organisms are capable of producing their own light. In the twilight zone, this light is used for a variety of purposes: to attract prey, to communicate with potential mates, to confuse predators, or to provide counter-illumination, matching the dim light from above so that the organism casts no shadow. The pressure in the twilight zone, while not yet extreme, is already profoundly different from the surface. At 1,000 meters, the pressure is approximately 100 times greater than atmospheric pressure at sea level. A human body at that depth, without protection, would be destroyed in an instant. Yet the creatures of this zone carry it as easily as we carry the weight of the air above us. Temperature in the twilight zone drops sharply. In tropical and temperate regions, the transition from the warm surface layer to the cold deep is marked by a region of rapid temperature change called the thermocline. Here, temperatures might drop from 20 degrees at the surface to just 4 or 5 degrees over the course of a few hundred meters. This temperature gradient acts as a barrier, inhibiting the vertical mixing of water and separating the sunlit surface from the cold depths below. As we descend through the twilight zone, the light continues to fade. The organisms around us grow stranger. The pressure climbs. And then, at around 1,000 meters, the last traces of sunlight disappear entirely. Below 1,000 meters lies the midnight zone, known formally as the bathypelagic zone. Here there is no sunlight at all, none whatsoever. The darkness is total and permanent, as complete as the darkness inside a sealed room with no windows, no cracks, no light source of any kind. It has been this way for as long as the ocean has existed. The only light in the midnight zone is biological. The cold flickers of bioluminescence, the brief, pulsing glow of creatures communicating, luring, warning, or simply existing in a world where chemical light has replaced solar light entirely. The temperature here is cold and remarkably stable. Deep waters in the midnight zone hover between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius almost everywhere in the ocean, regardless of latitude. Whether you are beneath the tropics or beneath the poles, the deep cold is constant. This uniformity of temperature is one of the most striking features of the deep ocean, and it reflects the fundamental nature of ocean circulation, which we will explore more fully later. Pressure in the midnight zone is immense. At 2,000 meters, the pressure is approximately 200 atmospheres, 200 times the pressure at the surface. At 4,000 meters, it approaches 400 atmospheres. The weight of the water column above is enough to compress air to a tiny fraction of its normal volume. Objects made of materials we consider rigid and strong are deformed or destroyed. Wooden objects implode. Styrofoam cups brought to these depths return to the surface, shrunken to the size of thimbles. Life in the midnight zone has adapted to this pressure in ways that are still not fully understood. Deep-sea fish have softer, more gelatinous bodies than their shallow water relatives. Their proteins and cell membranes are chemically different, structured to remain flexible and functional under conditions that would denature the proteins of a surface-dwelling animal. Some organisms have no gas-filled swim bladders, which would collapse under pressure, and instead achieve neutral buoyancy through the density of their watery tissues. Food is scarce in the midnight zone. There is no photosynthesis here, and the organisms of the twilight zone that migrate vertically do not typically venture this deep. Instead, The midnight zone relies primarily on what oceanographers call marine snow, a constant, slow precipitation of organic particles from the layers above. Marine snow is one of the ocean's most poetic phenomena. It consists of tiny flakes of dead organic matter, the bodies of deceased phytoplankton, fecal pellets from zooplankton, shed mucus, fragments of broken-up organisms. These particles drift downward through the water column at a rate of about 1 to 2 centimeters per second, taking weeks to reach the bottom. As they fall, they are consumed by bacteria and small organisms, gradually breaking down and diminishing, so that by the time they reach the midnight zone, they carry only a fraction of the energy they contained at the surface. In the midnight zone, everything is a matter of energy economy. Movement is slow. Metabolisms are reduced. Many of the fish found here have large mouths and expandable stomachs, capable of swallowing prey significantly larger than themselves, because meals are rare and an opportunity for feeding may not come again for days or weeks. Some deep-sea fish have evolved to be almost nothing but mouth and gut, reducing all other systems to a minimum. The anglerfish is perhaps the most iconic inhabitant of this zone. The female anglerfish carries a modified dorsal spine that protrudes from her forehead and ends in a luminous lure, a tiny biological lantern that glows in the darkness to attract curious prey. When something approaches the light, the anglerfish strikes with a mouth full of inward curving teeth, ensuring that nothing that enters can escape. The male anglerfish is a profoundly different creature. He is tiny, often no larger than a thumb, and he spends his short adult life searching for a female. When he finds one, he bites into her flesh, and his body begins to fuse with hers. Over time, his organs are absorbed. His circulatory system merges with hers. He becomes, in biological terms, a simple appendage, a source of sperm that she will carry for the rest of her life. It is one of the most extreme examples of parasitic mating in the animal kingdom. The midnight zone is also home to creatures that challenge our sense of what a living organism can be. Giant squid, the largest invertebrates on Earth, cruise through these depths. They can grow to over 13 meters in length and have eyes as large as dinner plates, thought to be an adaptation for detecting the bioluminescent flashes of their predators. We have never observed a giant squid alive in its natural habitat under controlled conditions. Most of what we know about them comes from specimens found in the stomachs of sperm whales or washed up on beaches. The sperm whale itself is a remarkable creature of the deep. It is the largest toothed predator on Earth and one of the deepest diving mammals, capable of descending to over 3,000 meters in pursuit of squid. A sperm whale holds its breath for up to 90 minutes at these depths, slowing its heart rate, diverting blood flow away from non-essential organs, and relying on the collapsible structure of its lungs to withstand the crushing pressure. The stories written in scars on sperm whale skin, great circular marks left by the suckers of giant squid, speak to battles conducted in complete darkness at pressures that would kill a human instantly. Below 4,000 meters, the ocean floor begins. This region, stretching from approximately 4,000 to 6,000 meters, is called the abyssal zone, or simply the abyss. It covers more than half of the Earth's surface, making it the single most common environment on our planet, and yet it remains almost entirely unexplored. The abyssal plain is not a featureless expanse, though it might appear so on a map. It is a landscape of extraordinary subtlety. There are gentle hills and gradual slopes. There are fields of sediment so fine and so undisturbed that the imprints of organisms that lived millions of years ago are still preserved within them. There are nodules of manganese and other minerals that have been slowly accumulating on the seafloor for tens of millions of years, growing at a rate of a few millimeters per 1,000 years. The sediment of the abyssal plain is itself a record of deep time. It is composed of the skeletal remains of billions of microscopic organisms that lived and died in the surface ocean over geological ages, drifting downward over millennia to settle in an ever-thickening layer. In some places, this sediment is hundreds of meters deep. By studying its composition at different depths, scientists can reconstruct the history of the ocean's temperature, chemistry, and biology, stretching back tens of millions of years. Life on the abyssal plain is sparse but not absent. Bacteria colonize the sediment and the particles of marine snow that drift down to them. Sea cucumbers, which are related to starfish, move slowly across the seafloor, ingesting sediment and extracting whatever organic matter remains. Brittle stars, strange animals distantly related to sea urchins, extend their thin arms upward into the water column to catch passing particles. Deep-sea fish patrol just above the bottom. The pace of life in the abyss is almost geological in its slowness. Some organisms here grow so slowly that a specimen a few centimeters across may be decades or even centuries old. Reproduction is infrequent. Encounters between individuals are rare. The strategies of life in this environment have been honed by millions of years of evolution under conditions that demand patience, efficiency, and an extraordinary tolerance for cold, darkness, and pressure. And yet, the abyssal plain is not the most extreme environment in the ocean. For that, we must descend further still. Below 6,000 meters in the deepest ocean trenches lies the Hadal Zone. The name comes from Hades, the ancient Greek realm of the dead, and it is not hard to understand why it was chosen. The Hadal Zone is the most extreme environment on the surface of our planet. It is cold, dark, crushingly pressurized, and cut off from the rest of the ocean in ways that have profound consequences for the life that exists there. The Hadal Zone consists almost entirely of deep-sea trenches, long narrow features formed where one tectonic plate slides beneath another in a process called subduction. These trenches are not distributed evenly across the ocean floor. Most are found in the Pacific Ocean, where several major tectonic boundaries create a ring of subduction zones around the basin's edge. The deepest of all ocean trenches, and the deepest point on the surface of the Earth, is the Challenger Deep, located in the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific Ocean. Its deepest measured point is approximately 10,935 meters below sea level. If you were to place Mount Everest, the highest point on land, into the Challenger Deep, its summit would still be more than a kilometer beneath the ocean surface. The pressure at the bottom of the Challenger Deep is approximately 1,086 times the pressure at sea level. This is not simply a large number. It represents a physical reality that is almost incomprehensible. Every square centimeter of surface area at that depth bears the weight of roughly a ton of water. Materials that are rigid at the surface deform and flow. The few research vessels that have reached this depth have had their hulls compressed measurably by the pressure, creaking and groaning as they descended. The first human beings to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench were Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, who descended in the bathyscaphe Trieste in January 1960. They saw, to their astonishment, a flatfish resting on the bottom, a small creature with both eyes on the same side of its head, lying calmly in the sediment at the deepest point on Earth, as though it were the most ordinary place imaginable. That sighting revolutionized our understanding of life in the deep ocean. It had been assumed by many scientists that the extreme pressure and scarcity of food in the Hadal Zone would make it essentially lifeless. The fish on the bottom of the Mariana Trench suggested otherwise. Since then, explorations of deep trenches have revealed ecosystems of surprising complexity and diversity. Among the most remarkable inhabitants of the Hadal Zone are small crustaceans called amphipods, similar in general form to the sand hoppers you might find on a beach. In the deep trenches, these animals reach extraordinary sizes, sometimes growing to more than 30 centimeters in length, a phenomenon known as deep-sea gigantism. They gather in enormous numbers around any food source that reaches the trench floor, swarming over the carcasses of whales or large fish that have sunk from above. These whale falls, as they are called, are oases of energy in the deep. A single whale carcass can sustain a thriving community of organisms for decades. First, the mobile scavengers arrive, amphipods and sharks and hagfish, stripping the flesh rapidly. Then a second-stage community colonizes the exposed skeleton, feeding on the enriched sediment. Finally, bacteria attack the lipid-rich bones themselves, producing hydrogen sulfide as a byproduct. which in turn supports a chemosynthetic community similar to those found at hydrothermal vents. The concept of a whale fall as a habitat, a temporary but rich island of life in an otherwise austere environment, was only described scientifically in the late 1970s. Before that, we simply did not know. Every decade of deep-sea exploration seems to bring discoveries that rewrite our understanding of what is possible. Of all the discoveries made in the deep ocean in the 20th century, none was more transformative than the discovery of hydrothermal vents. In 1977, a research team using the deep-sea submersible Alvin descended to a section of the East Pacific Rise, a mid-ocean ridge where tectonic plates are pulling apart and new seafloor is being created. They expected to find the usual sparse deep-sea desert. What they found instead astonished them. At a depth of approximately 2,500 meters, they encountered a landscape of extraordinary vitality. Water was gushing from cracks in the seafloor, superheated to temperatures of up to 400 degrees Celsius by the magma below. This water carried with it dissolved minerals, including large quantities of hydrogen sulfide. Around the vents, these minerals had precipitated into tall mineral chimneys, some of them several meters high, belching streams of dark, mineral-laden fluid that looked, from a distance, like black smoke. These structures are now called black smokers. But what truly stunned the scientists was what lived around these vents. In a zone of warm, chemical-rich water around each vent, they found life in extraordinary abundance. Giant tube worms up to 2 meters long and as thick as a human arm, clustered in dense thickets, their bright red plumes extending from white tubes anchored to the seafloor. Huge white crabs clambered among them. Mats of bacteria covered every surface. Giant clams, 30 centimeters across, lay in piles. None of this life was powered by sunlight. There was no sunlight here, had never been any. Instead, the entire ecosystem was powered by a process called chemosynthesis, the use of chemical energy rather than light energy to produce organic matter. Specialized bacteria could use the hydrogen sulfide emanating from the vents as an energy source, oxidizing it to produce the organic compounds that formed the base of the food chain. Everything else, the tube worms, the clams, the crabs, the fish, fed either directly on these bacteria or on organisms that did. The discovery of hydrothermal vents and chemosynthetic ecosystems changed biology fundamentally. Before 1977, the consensus was that all life on Earth ultimately depended on sunlight. The existence of thriving ecosystems in permanent darkness, powered by chemical energy from the interior of the Earth, demonstrated that this was not true. It meant that life did not require sunlight. It meant that life could potentially exist in environments that received no solar energy at all. The implications extended far beyond Earth. If life could survive and flourish around hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean, with no sunlight and under crushing pressure, then life might be possible in similar environments elsewhere in the solar system. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, is believed to have a vast ocean beneath its icy surface, maintained in a liquid state by tidal heating. That ocean likely contains hydrothermal vents. The discovery of life around Earth's deep-sea vents made the question of life on Europa considerably less hypothetical. The giant tube worms found at hydrothermal vents, Rifschapachyptilla, deserve particular attention. They are among the fastest-growing invertebrates known to science, capable of growing more than a meter per year under favorable conditions. They have no mouth and no digestive system. They feed entirely through a specialized organ called a trophosome, which is packed with chemosynthetic bacteria that the worm provides with oxygen and hydrogen sulfide in exchange for organic compounds. It is a partnership of extraordinary intimacy, worked out over millions of years of coevolution. Hydrothermal vents are not permanent features. They are active only as long as the geological processes that sustain them continue. When a vent goes cold, its community collapses and disperses. But new vents open elsewhere, and the species that depend on them have evolved mechanisms for colonizing new vents across vast distances of deep ocean. using the same slow currents that carry marine snow to carry their larvae from one oasis to the next. The deep ocean is not static. It is in motion, driven by forces that operate over timescales of centuries and even millennia. Understanding how the deep ocean circulates is essential to understanding the climate of our planet, the distribution of nutrients, and the fate of the carbon that living things have stored in organic matter. The circulation of the ocean can be divided into two systems. The first is the wind-driven surface circulation, which creates the great surface currents, the Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. These currents are driven by prevailing winds and modified by the rotation of the Earth, and they circulate within the upper few hundred meters of the ocean. The second system is deeper and slower. It is driven not by wind but by differences in water density, which in turn depend on temperature and salinity. This is called thermohaline circulation, from the Greek words for heat and salt. It is sometimes referred to, with a degree of poetic license, as the ocean conveyor belt. The basic principle is this: cold water is denser than warm water. Salty water is denser than fresh water. When surface water becomes cold enough and salty enough, it becomes denser than the water below it and sinks. This sinking drives a deep circulation that moves water slowly but continuously around the entire global ocean. The most important sites of deep water formation are in the North Atlantic and around Antarctica. In the North Atlantic, the Gulf Stream carries warm, salty surface water northward. As this water gives up its heat to the atmosphere, it cools and becomes dense enough to sink, forming what is called North Atlantic deep water. This water then flows southward along the seafloor, eventually reaching the Southern Ocean, where it joins water sinking around Antarctica to form Antarctic bottom water, the densest and coldest water mass in the ocean. Antarctic bottom water is so cold and so dense that it flows along the very bottom of the ocean basins, beneath all other water masses. It fills the abyssal plains with water that last touched the surface thousands of years ago. The water at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, the largest and deepest of the ocean basins, may have been isolated from the surface for over 1,000 years before it slowly wells up again somewhere in the tropics. This slow, deep circulation has profound consequences. It carries oxygen from the surface into the deep, sustaining life in depths that would otherwise be anoxic. It transports dissolved nutrients from the deep ocean, where they have accumulated from the breakdown of falling organic matter, back to the surface, where they fuel the growth of phytoplankton. It redistributes heat around the planet, moderating the climate of coastal regions and contributing to the relative mildness of Northwest Europe. The thermohaline circulation also plays a crucial role in the long-term carbon cycle. As surface water sinks, it carries with it dissolved carbon dioxide and the carbon locked within the bodies of organisms. This carbon is removed from contact with the atmosphere for centuries or millennia. The deep ocean is, in this sense, the world's largest carbon reservoir, holding far more carbon than the atmosphere, the land, and all living organisms combined. Changes to this circulation could have profound effects on the planet's climate. There is evidence that the thermohaline circulation has slowed and even stopped during past ice ages, with dramatic consequences for global temperature patterns. Current observations suggest that the influx of fresh water from melting ice sheets in Greenland may be weakening the density-driven sinking in the North Atlantic, with consequences that are still being debated. In the darkness of the deep ocean, light is useless as a medium for long-distance communication, but sound travels extraordinarily well through water, much better than it travels through air. Water is far denser than air, and sound waves travel approximately 4.5 times faster in seawater than in air. For the inhabitants of the deep ocean, and for the scientists who study them, sound is the primary sense. The speed of sound in seawater depends on temperature, pressure, and salinity. In the ocean, these factors create a fascinating acoustic structure. In the upper layers, warm temperatures increase sound speed. As temperature drops rapidly through the thermocline, sound speed decreases. But as depth increases further, pressure begins to dominate and sound speed increases again. This creates a minimum sound speed at an intermediate depth, typically between 600 and 1200 meters, depending on location. This depth of minimum sound speed is called the SOFAR channel, which stands for sound fixing and ranging. It has a remarkable property. Sound waves traveling horizontally at this depth are trapped, bent back toward the channel each time they try to escape upward or downward by the changing sound speed gradient. As a result, sound introduced into the SOFAR channel can travel enormous distances with very little loss of energy. Low-frequency sounds introduced into the SOFAR channel have been detected thousands of kilometers from their source. Scientists have used this property to track underwater explosions and to conduct global-scale acoustic tomography experiments, effectively measuring the temperature of the entire ocean by timing how long it takes for sound to travel between known points. The SOFAR channel functions as a kind of global acoustic waveguide, and understanding it has had implications for both marine biology and military technology. The blue whale uses the SOFAR channel, though probably without knowing it. Blue whales produce the loudest sounds of any animal on Earth, low-frequency moans that can reach nearly 200 decibels. These sounds travel at depths that overlap with the SOFAR channel, and they may be detected by other blue whales thousands of kilometers away. In the era before industrial shipping, when the ocean was quieter, blue whales may have been able to communicate across entire ocean basins. The acoustic environment of the deep ocean has changed dramatically in the past century. Ship traffic, sonar systems, seismic surveys, and industrial noise have raised the background noise level of the ocean across a wide range of frequencies. For animals that depend on acoustic communication, particularly whales, this noise represents a significant challenge. Research has shown that some whale populations have changed the frequency and timing of their calls in response to increased ocean noise, an adaptation that carries costs and may not be possible for all species. The US Navy's SOSUS network, a vast array of hydrophones installed on the seafloor during the Cold War to detect the sounds of Soviet submarines, inadvertently became one of the most important tools in marine biology. After the Cold War, portions of the SOSUS data were made available to scientists, who discovered that it had been recording the sounds of blue whales, fin whales, and other baleen whales for decades. Analysis of these recordings has provided an unprecedented view into the distribution and behavior of some of the ocean's largest and most elusive animals. The deep ocean is not just a place in space. It is a place in time. The processes that operate here do so on timescales that dwarf human history and even the entire span of human civilization. To understand the deep ocean fully, we must be willing to think in millions of years. The ocean itself is ancient. Water has been present on Earth's surface for at least 3.8 billion years, possibly longer, arriving partly from volcanic outgassing and partly from comets and asteroids in the early solar system. The first oceans were chemically very different from today's: warmer, less salty, rich in dissolved iron, and largely devoid of oxygen. Life originated in this early ocean, and for the first 2 billion years of life's history, the ocean remained the only inhabited environment on Earth. The modern ocean's chemistry reflects billions of years of biological and geological activity. The salinity of seawater is not arbitrary. It reflects the gradual weathering of rocks on land, the slow dissolution of minerals by rain and rivers, and the eventual deposition of those minerals in the sea. The concentration of dissolved calcium carbonate, which forms the shells and skeletons of countless marine organisms, reflects a delicate balance between biological uptake, chemical dissolution, and the constant input of calcium from rivers. The deep-sea sediment record preserves the history of all these processes. In cores drilled from the seafloor, scientists can read the composition of past oceans in the shells of tiny organisms called foraminifera, which were buried alive in the sediment millions of years ago. The ratio of different oxygen isotopes in these shells reflects the temperature of the water in which the organism lived. By measuring this ratio at different depths in a sediment core, and therefore at different times in the past, scientists can reconstruct the history of ocean temperature stretching back millions of years. This paleoceanographic record reveals that the ocean's deep water temperature has changed dramatically over geological time. During the warmest periods of Earth's history, such as the Cretaceous period about 100 million years ago, there were no ice caps at the poles. The sea level was much higher than today, and the deep ocean was significantly warmer. During ice ages, the deep ocean cooled, and the formation of vast ice sheets on land lowered sea levels by well over 100 meters. The ocean's biological productivity has also varied over time. There have been periods of ocean anoxia, when deep waters became depleted of oxygen and large areas of the seafloor became hostile to almost all life. These oceanic anoxic events, which occurred several times in Earth's history, are associated with mass extinctions in marine ecosystems and with the formation of some of the world's great petroleum deposits, the compressed remains of enormous quantities of organic matter that sank to an anoxic seafloor and was preserved rather than consumed. Today, the deep ocean faces challenges that are both unprecedented and deeply concerning. The absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is causing ocean acidification, a reduction in the pH of seawater that affects the ability of organisms to form calcium carbonate shells and skeletons. The deep ocean is warming more slowly than the surface, but it is warming. The patterns of deep water formation, which have been stable for thousands of years, are beginning to shift. We are conducting, without fully understanding, an experiment on the largest and oldest ecosystem on Earth. Given how little we know about the deep ocean, the history of deep-sea exploration is a history of the gradual, painstaking acquisition of knowledge against extraordinary technical challenges. The deep ocean is one of the most hostile environments humans have ever attempted to enter. It is cold, dark, and under pressure that requires engineering solutions of remarkable sophistication. The earliest systematic deep-sea expeditions used simple weighted lines to probe the depths. In the late 19th century, the HMS Challenger expedition, conducted between 1872 and 1876, collected thousands of samples of seafloor sediment and deep-sea organisms from around the world, establishing oceanography as a scientific discipline and providing the first comprehensive picture of the deep ocean's contents. The diversity and strangeness of the creatures brought up in the expedition's nets astonished the scientific world. The development of echo sounding in the early 20th century revolutionized mapping of the ocean floor. By measuring the time it takes for a pulse of sound to travel to the seafloor and return, ships could determine water depth without lowering a physical line. This technique gradually revealed the true topography of the ocean floor, including the existence of the mid-ocean ridges, the longest mountain ranges on Earth, and the deep-sea trenches, the deepest valleys. The invention of the deep-sea submersible made direct observation of the ocean floor possible. The bathyscaphe Trieste, which reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 1960, was a landmark achievement. But it was the development of smaller, more maneuverable research submersibles like Alvin, operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, that made systematic exploration practical. Alvin has completed thousands of dives and has been involved in some of the most important discoveries in the history of oceanography, including the discovery of hydrothermal vents. In recent decades, remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, have increasingly supplemented and in some areas replaced crewed submersibles. ROVs can dive deeper and stay down longer than crewed vehicles, and they remove the risk to human operators. Their cameras and manipulator arms can be controlled from a ship at the surface, and they can transmit high-definition video in real time. Modern ROVs have revealed a deep ocean of extraordinary visual richness, full of creatures and landscapes that no human eye had ever seen before. Autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, take this a step further. These vehicles navigate without any real-time human control, following pre-programmed missions to map the seafloor, collect water samples, or deploy instruments. They can cover large areas efficiently and operate in conditions that would make human-crewed dives impractical. Future AUVs may be capable of operating for months or even years at a time, providing continuous monitoring of deep ocean conditions. Despite these technological advances, vast areas of the deep ocean floor remain unmapped at fine scales. The seafloor maps that appear in atlases and globes are composite images derived from acoustic measurements taken at relatively coarse resolution. The detailed topography of most of the ocean floor is still unknown. By some estimates, we have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. Each new dive into the deep produces new discoveries. New species are described regularly from deep-sea expeditions. New geological structures are mapped. New chemical processes are identified. The deep ocean is not a solved problem. It is an open frontier, one of the last on Earth, and the pace of discovery suggests that it will remain one for many years to come. We have descended tonight from the sunlit surface of the ocean to the deepest trench at the bottom of the world. We have passed through zones of twilight and total darkness. We have visited ecosystems that survive without sunlight. We have encountered creatures of extraordinary adaptation and strange beauty. We have learned how the deep ocean circulates, how it communicates through sound, how it has changed over geological time, and how we are changing it now. The deep ocean is perhaps the most important environment we have not yet fully learned to see. It covers more than half of our planet. It regulates our climate. It stores our carbon. It shelters a majority of Earth's living space, and yet it remains, in large part, unknown. There is something humbling about this. In an age when we can map the surface of distant planets and sequence the genomes of ancient organisms, the bottom of our own ocean remains shrouded in darkness and mystery. Every expedition brings back new creatures, new geological formations, new chemical processes, and new questions. But perhaps there is also something comforting about it. There are still unknown things on this Earth. There are still places that have never been seen. There are still discoveries waiting to be made by the scientists who build the submersibles, who program the autonomous vehicles, who spend long cold nights at sea waiting for the next haul of the net. The ocean is patient. It has been here for nearly 4 billion years. It will be here long after the last human being has gone. In its depths, the pressures are steady, the temperatures constant, the darkness complete and unchanged. Life moves slowly, adapts over millions of years, and carries on regardless of what happens on the surface far above. If you find yourself drifting now, let it be toward that depth. Let the water settle around you, dark and cold and still. Let the pressure ease from your thoughts. Let the bioluminescent sparks of unseen creatures light the edges of your dreams. The deep ocean does not ask anything of you. It simply continues as it always has, in silence and in darkness, and in the slow, steady pulse of a world still largely unknown. Thank you for being here tonight. We hope the ocean carries you somewhere restful. Sleep well.